Has anyone else noticed that every game nowadays is just massive? I swear every time I open Steam there's another game asking for 100 gigabytes or more. At this point downloading a game feels like downloading an entire operating system. Still remember when people used to complain that a 20 gigabyte game was huge. Now if a game comes out and it's only 40 gigabytes everyone calls it well optimized. It honestly makes me wonder, when did this become normal? Because it feels like it happens so fast. Storage used to be the last thing you worried about. I honestly don't remember storage ever being something you had to think about. I find the game I just wanted, click install, and then just wait for it to finish downloading. That was it. Nowadays, before I even think about buying a game, the first thing I check isn't the reviews or even the price, it's the storage requirements. Because if Steam says it needs another 120 gigabytes, I already know what's about to happen. I'm gonna spend the next 20 minutes scrolling through my library asking myself what can I uninstall, and somehow I always end up deleting a game I want to play again. Modern games are honestly getting to the point where installing just one of them feels like commitment. Games like Call of Duty, Red Dead Redemption 2, Microsoft Flight Simulator, or ARK can take up an insane amount of storage. Installing just a few of those and suddenly your drive is almost full. It's actually crazy that one modern game can take up the same amount of space as 10 or 15 older games used to. Now to be fair, I understand why games are getting bigger. They're obviously way more detailed now, maps are bigger, textures are much higher quality, characters have thousands of animations. There's voice acting, motion capture, better audio, and much more content than games used to have. If you compare a game from 2010 to one from today, the difference is huge. So I'm not saying games should magically go back to being 15 gigabytes, but sometimes I do wonder if every game really needs to be over 100 gigabytes, because it feels like developers have just accepted that everyone has unlimited storage. And that's what makes this even more interesting. A lot of people assume games are just getting bigger because they have to, but that's not always true. A great example of this problem is Helldivers 2, which is actually one of my favorite horde shooter games in recent years. When it first released, the game took up around 120 gigabytes of storage, which is a massive amount for a game that, while visually impressive, didn't seem like it should need that much space. But later, after a relatively simple fix on how the game handled its files, the developers managed to reduce the install size dramatically, bringing it down to around 25 gigabytes. That's nearly 100 gigabytes of storage saved without the game being completely rebuilt or losing its identity. Now, Helldivers 2 is far from perfect, still has its problems with balancing, bugs, and some graphical issues that players have pointed out, but that's not really the point here. The reason this example matters is because it shows that some modern games aren't always huge because they have hundreds of gigabytes of content. Sometimes they're huge because of inefficient storage systems, and when a single optimization can remove almost 100 gigabytes from a game, it raises the question, how many other massive games could be taking up way more space than they actually need? And the funniest part is, even after you finally downloaded the game, you're still not done. Launch Steam and suddenly there's another 25 gigabyte update waiting. You finally finish downloading that, then next week there's another one. Sometimes it honestly feels like I spend more time downloading updates than actually playing the game. For example, every time I decide to play some game, I'll say, yeah, I'm gonna play this tonight. Steam somehow decides that's the perfect time for another massive download. Why does Call of Duty need my entire SSD? I think Call of Duty has become the perfect example of this. Every year it somehow gets even bigger. I swear there are people who literally bought another SSD just so they could keep Call of Duty installed. And every big update somehow adds another 20 or 30 gigabytes. At some point you have to ask, how does one multiplayer shooter take up more space than 5 older games combined? It's honestly impressive. And the funny thing is that every year people joke that the next Call of Duty is going to be 300 gigabytes. And honestly it doesn't even sound that unrealistic anymore. I also think faster internet is one of the reasons this doesn't get talked about as much anymore. Years ago, downloading a 50 gigabyte game would take forever for most people. Developers had to think about file sizes because people simply couldn't download massive games that easily. Now a lot of people have really fast internet, so maybe developers don't feel as much pressure to optimize everything because eventually people will get the download finished anyway. Download isn't really the biggest problem anymore, it's finding somewhere to actually store the game. Spend more time managing storage than playing. I've genuinely reached the point where managing storage feels like part of PC gaming. Every time I want a new game, it's the same routine. Okay, what can I uninstall? Am I ever gonna play this again? Maybe I should keep it installed just in case. And after 5 minutes of convincing myself, I delete it anyway. The funniest part is that a month later, I usually end up downloading the same exact game anyway. So I'm basically stuck in an endless cycle of downloading, uninstalling, and downloading the same games over and over again. At this point, my SSD probably spends more time moving games around than I actually spend playing them. Honestly, whenever I see a game that's only 20 gigabytes now, I'm actually surprised. Years ago, that would be considered massive. I look at it and think, finally, I don't have to uninstall everything to play this. this. It's weird how quickly our expectations changed. A game being under 30 gigabytes almost feel like a selling point now. You don't have to think about deleting anything, you just click install and you're done. I never thought we'd get to a point where 20 gigabytes feels small. I'm not saying games should go back to looking like they did 15 years ago. Modern graphics are incredible, and obviously all that detail takes up space. I just think we've reached the point where every new release feels like it's asking for half of your SSD. And honestly, I'm getting tired of having to uninstall 3 games just to play one. Maybe one day developers will figure out a way to make games smaller again, but until then, I'll be sitting in my Steam library deciding which game has to go every time a new one comes out. Anyways, thank you for watching.